Los Angeles, 1927. The Cecil Hotel opened its doors with the air of ambition and grandeur. It was the roaring 20s, the golden age of jazz, the rise of Hollywood, and Los Angeles was growing at a feverish pace. Built in the heart of the city, this Beaux-Arts-style structure, with its marble interiors and elegant facade, was meant to be a jewel of the West Coast. $30 million had been invested in its construction, an astronomical figure for its time. Its founders envisioned a haven of refinement for traveling businessmen and wealthy tourists. But soon, as though the very ground beneath its foundations resisted that promise of prosperity, the Cecil began to draw a very different kind of guest. The Great Depression fell over America like a suffocating shroud, and the clientele shifted. What was meant to be a temple of luxury became a shelter for the desperate, for drifters, for those seeking a cheap bed in the increasingly grim downtown. Around the hotel, poverty and crime flourished, and the district would later be known by a chilling name, Skid Row. The first tragedy struck in 1931. W.K. Norton, a traveling salesman, was found dead in his room after ingesting poison. Newspapers wrote about it briefly, noting it as a quiet suicide. But in hindsight, it was only the beginning. In the following years, the list of deaths grew. Gunshots, overdoses, poisonings, falls from upper floors. The Cecil became notorious for its string of suicides, and an unsettling pattern seemed to form. Death visited the Cecil not randomly, but with disturbing regularity, as if the building itself carried some malignant gravity. In 1962, tragedy reached a grotesque climax. Pauline Otten, following an argument with her estranged husband, leapt from her ninth-floor window. In her fall, she landed on an unsuspecting pedestrian below, killing him instantly as well. 2 lives extinguished in one violent instant. 2 years later, in 1964, another story cemented the hotel's reputation. Pigeon Goldie, a beloved local who spent her days feeding the birds in nearby Pershing Square, was found in her room, raped, stabbed, and strangled. A suspect was arrested, but soon released. The murder was never solved. By then, the Cecil was no longer just a hotel. It was a symbol of something darker, a magnet for despair. Locals called it the Suicide Hotel. And there was more. During the 1980s, Richard Ramirez, the infamous Night Stalker, took up residence at the Cecil while terrorizing Los Angeles with a spree of murders and assaults. He would return to his room, bloodied, disposing of his clothes in the dumpsters behind the hotel. A decade later, another serial killer, Jack Unterweger, lodged there while murdering women across the city. The building's reputation hardened. It was no longer merely haunted by suicides, but by killers themselves. Its name became shorthand for evil, a nexus where tragedy and violence converged. Los Angeles, 2013. By the time Elisa Lam arrived in Los Angeles, the Cecil carried nearly a century of infamy. Elisa was 21 years old, a Canadian student traveling alone along the west coast of the United States. She had already passed through San Diego and was planning to head toward Santa Cruz and San Francisco. The trip was supposed to be an adventure, one she documented faithfully on her Tumblr blog, Nouvelle Nouveau. Her blog was a mosaic of personal thoughts, dark humor, fashion images, and literary quotes. It revealed a restless, creative soul, but also a fragile one. Elisa had been open about her struggles with bipolar disorder. She spoke candidly about her moods, her medication, and the constant effort to maintain balance. For her, the Cecil was simply an affordable downtown hotel. She didn't know, or perhaps didn't care, that it was infamous. To her, it was just a place to stay in the City of Angels. On January 31st, 2013, she vanished. The elevator video. Days later, the Los Angeles Police Department released surveillance footage in the hope that the public might help locate her. The video was recorded in the hotel's elevator. Elisa enters, wearing a red jacket. She presses several buttons quickly, as though in a rush, as though choosing multiple floors at random. But the elevator doesn't move. The doors remain stubbornly open. She steps back, leans into the corner. Then she cautiously peeks out into the hallway, as if someone might be following her. She retreats again. Then, suddenly, she steps out, moves her hands in strange, almost theatrical gestures, like she's speaking to someone invisible, like she's negotiating with a presence just beyond the frame. Her movements are erratic, awkward, unsettling. Then she vanishes from view. And only then does the elevator door close, descending into the depths as though obeying a delayed command. The video lasted just 4 minutes. But those 4 minutes ignited a firestorm. Millions watched. Millions speculated. Some insisted she was under the influence of drugs. Others pointed to her bipolar disorder, imagining she was in the midst of a manic episode. And then there were those who swore she was interacting with something supernatural. The internet christened it the creepiest elevator video in history. The discovery. On February 19th, nearly 3 weeks after she disappeared, guests began to complain about the water. The pressure was low. The liquid was oddly discolored. Some described it as having a strange taste, metallic, unpleasant. A maintenance worker climbed to the rooftop, to the giant water tanks that fed the building. He opened one of the lids. Floating inside was the body of Elisa Lamb. She was naked, her clothes floating nearby, her corpse decomposing in the very water guests had been drinking, bathing in, brushing their teeth with. The horror was almost unimaginable. The rooftop was supposed to be inaccessible. The doors leading to it were locked and equipped with alarms. The water tanks were heavy, sealed with lids difficult to lift. And yet somehow, Elisa had ended up inside. The autopsy provided no closure. No drugs, no alcohol. Only her prescribed medications. The cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, but the world was not convinced. The case of Elisa Lamb exploded across the globe. The elevator video became an icon of the unexplainable. It wasn't just the tragedy of a young woman lost. It was the symbolism, the feeling that the Cecil had once again claimed another soul. Was it a tragic accident? A psychotic break? Or had she, like so many before her, been pulled into the dark gravity of the building itself? The Cecil stood silent. Its walls, already soaked in decades of blood and grief, had absorbed yet another mystery. The aftermath of the elevator video. When the elevator footage of Elisa Lamb was released to the public, it was as though a gate had been opened, and what spilled forth was not clarity, but a torrent of obsession. Millions of viewers across continents replayed those 4 minutes endlessly, scrutinizing every second as though the truth might slip from the shadows if only they stared long enough. The video did not explain, it multiplied the questions. Why did the elevator not respond to her frantic button presses? Why did the doors remain open, suspended in unnatural stillness, until the very moment she vanished from sight? And why did her hands, her body, her movements carry that eerie cadence, as though she were engaged in a dialogue with someone, or something, that the camera could not capture? On internet forums, in YouTube comment sections, and across social media, theories blossomed like poisonous flowers. Some clung to the clinical explanation. They spoke of bipolar disorder, of hallucinations, of a young woman caught in the merciless grip of her own mind. To them, the gestures were not supernatural but symptomatic, a tragic display of disorientation, mania, perhaps paranoia. But others, many others, saw something more. Whispers of the supernatural. The Cecil Hotel's reputation provided fertile ground for darker interpretations. Its long shadow of suicides, murders, and associations with serial killers transformed the video into a ritual of collective dread. People began to speak of the building itself as cursed, a nexus of malevolence feeding off human suffering. The elevator scene, they said, was not madness but haunting. Elisa was not alone in that narrow metal chamber. She was negotiating with a presence that the human eye could not perceive, a figure just outside the camera's frame. Her gestures, some claimed, resembled those of a game popular in East Asia known as the elevator game. According to urban legend, riding an elevator through a sequence of floors could open a door to another world, a shadow dimension populated by spirits. Elisa's pattern of button pressing, seemingly random, frantic, echoed the ritual. The legend warned that one might encounter a woman, not human, who should never be addressed, never trusted. Watching the footage, believers whispered, "She played the game, and she did not survive." Theories multiplied with chilling creativity. Some pointed out the water tank as a symbol, likening it to purification rituals, to drowning as an ancient form of sacrifice. Others claimed the tank's lid could not have been closed from the inside, suggesting someone had placed her there. The simple, clinical words on her autopsy, "accidental drowning," became a fragile shield against the tide of imagination. The conspiracies. And then came the conspiracies. Some internet detectives noted eerie coincidences with an outbreak of tuberculosis in Los Angeles' Skid Row at the time of Elisa's disappearance. The test used to diagnose that outbreak? It bore the name Elisa. To the online theorists, this was no coincidence, but a sinister link, as though her death were part of some coded message, some hidden conspiracy woven between disease, government, and death. Others invoked occult practices, pointing to the hotel's proximity to notorious figures in Los Angeles' darker spiritual history. Aleister Crowley had long been rumored to have passed through the city. Jack Parsons, the rocket scientist and occultist, had lived not far away. Charles Manson had connections to Skid Row. To the imaginative, Elisa had stumbled into a building that was more ritual site than hotel, and her death was a continuation of its cursed lineage. Some even reached backward across decades to tie Elisa's fate to the 2005 film Dark Water. The movie depicted a young woman and her daughter moving into an apartment building plagued by a leaking water tank on the roof. Black, tainted water dripped from faucets, and a girl was found drowned inside the tank. The parallels were too precise, too unsettling. How could reality echo fiction with such sharpness? Was it coincidence or something orchestrated? The hotel's silence. The Cecil Hotel itself offered no answers. By 2013, the once grand structure had been rebranded as the Stay on Main, an attempt to cleanse it of its macabre reputation. But the new name was a thin disguise. The bones of the building remained the same. The water tanks remained. The elevators remained. The dark corridors where addicts, drifters, and killers had walked for nearly a century remained. The management insisted the rooftop was secure, the doors leading to it locked, the alarms functional. No guest should have been able to access the tanks. Yet Elisa did. Police offered no explanation beyond the clinical report. There were no signs of foul play, no bruises, no trauma. But for the millions who had watched the elevator video, who had felt the prickle of unease crawl over their skin as Elisa gestured into the empty hallway, silence was no comfort. The Cecil was silent. Too silent. The guests and the water. Perhaps the most grotesque element of the case lay not in the footage, not in the autopsy, but in the experiences of the hotel's guests during those 19 days Elisa's body rested in the tank. They brushed their teeth with her. They bathed in her. They drank her. The thought alone turned stomachs, but for some, it awakened something deeper, an almost ritual horror. To consume water infused with the essence of death, unknowingly, is to partake in a communion. What if, they whispered, the building had not only claimed Elisa, but had offered her to all who stayed within its walls, binding them into its story forever? The guests who later learned of it would speak of the metallic taste, the discoloration. Some gagged at the memory. Others spoke of nightmares, of restless nights that only made sense after they understood the truth. The Cecil had transformed death into consumption, and no one could escape the contamination. A digital ghost, In the weeks and months after her death, Elisa Lam's blog remained online, a ghostly echo of her voice. Followers returned to it obsessively, poring over her final posts, her final words. Photographs of fashion, fragments of literature, reflections on depression, her life laid bare in digital fragments. To many, her Tumblr became an altar. They left comments, prayers, confessions. They treated it as though Elisa herself lingered there, waiting, responding, existing in some half-light between presence and absence. And so her story did not end with the autopsy. It lingered in the digital ether, in the millions of views of the elevator video, in the forums and podcasts and documentaries. Elisa Lam became immortal, not through her will, but through her tragedy. The Cecil endures. The building still stands. It has been renamed, rebranded, renovated. But no matter how many coats of paint are spread, no matter how many times the name is changed, the air around it remains heavy. The ghosts do not leave. For nearly a century, the Cecil Hotel has drawn death to its doors. Suicides, murders, serial killers, and now the most infamous viral mystery of the 21st century. And so people ask, is the hotel cursed? Is it merely coincidence, magnified by human imagination? Or is there something more, something unseen, feeding on the despair that gathers in those hallways? Perhaps the answer lies in the elevator video itself. Because when millions of people watch the same 4 minutes of tape, and all feel the same unease, the same chill in their bones, it is no longer just Elisa Lam's mystery. It is ours, the spreading of the curse. Elisa Lam's death was not merely a story contained within the walls of the Cecil Hotel. It became a contagion of mystery that seeped outward into the world, amplified by the new religion of the 21st century, the Internet. The elevator video, uploaded to YouTube by the Los Angeles Police Department in February of 2013, should have been a simple request for information. It was intended as a clue, a tool to jog memories, a desperate plea for witnesses. Instead, it was fuel. Fuel for obsession. Fuel for fear. Within days, the video had millions of views. News outlets replayed it on loop, presenting it not as evidence, but as spectacle. Talk shows invited body language experts to interpret Elisa's movements. Paranormal enthusiasts slowed the footage down, frame by frame, pointing to moments they claimed showed an invisible hand, a flicker of shadow, or the distorted reflection of another figure. The Cecil Hotel, already infamous, became something more, a digital haunted house, an icon of urban dread. Documentaries and obsessions. Years later, Netflix's Crime Scene, The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, would dedicate 4 episodes to Elisa's case. But even before then, podcasts, YouTube series, and amateur documentaries dissected her story endlessly. Each retelling reshaped her into something new. To some, she was a victim of systemic negligence, a young woman with mental health struggles failed by both the hotel and the city around her. To others, she was a character in an unfolding ghost story, a cursed figure lured into the hotel's embrace. And to conspiracy theorists, she was a pawn in a grander scheme, her death a symbol of shadowy forces manipulating events beyond our comprehension. The more her story was told, the less it belonged to her. The hotel as a living entity. The Cecil itself began to feel less like a building and more like a character, a presence. Those who visited spoke of an atmosphere that could not be explained by peeling wallpaper or broken neon lights. It was in the air, in the silence of the long corridors, in the way the lights flickered as though straining under some unseen weight. Guests reported waking in the night to whispers. Some claimed to see a woman in the halls who was not there upon second glance. Housekeepers spoke of strange sounds on the upper floors, especially near the roof access. One swore she saw water dripping from the ceiling when no pipes were broken, as though the building itself wept for the dead girl. The Cecil was no longer a hotel. It was a body, and its walls were veins, its rooms organs. Elisa Lam's death was simply the latest heartbeat in a rhythm of horror stretching back a century. The myth of dark water. Among the most disturbing threads was the uncanny parallel between Elisa's death and the 2005 Japanese horror film Dark Water. In the film, a mother and daughter move into a decaying apartment building plagued by leaks. Dark, murky water drips from the ceiling. A girl in red is discovered drowned in a rooftop water tank. The similarities were grotesque. The tank, the contamination of water, the isolation of a young woman, it was all there. Conspiracy theorists seized upon it as proof of something larger. Was Elisa's death orchestrated to mirror the film? Was it a ritualistic reenactment, meant to blur the line between fiction and reality? Or was it proof of synchronicity, the unsettling phenomenon where coincidence feels like destiny, as though the universe itself was foreshadowing tragedy? For those who believed in curses, the connection was undeniable. Art had not imitated life, life had imitated art. The Internet detectives. Perhaps the strangest legacy of Elisa Lam's case was the rise of Internet detectives. On Reddit, YouTube, and other corners of the web, thousands of self-appointed investigators picked apart every detail. Hotel maps, water tank schematics, police reports, autopsy results. They scrutinized her Tumblr posts, searching for hidden meanings, codes, cries for help. One YouTuber fixated on a musician named Morbid, who had once stayed at the Cecil. Because his music contained dark themes and he had uploaded a video from the hotel, Internet sleuths descended upon him, accusing him of murder. Despite his innocence, he had not even been in Los Angeles at the time. He was harassed to the brink of collapse. The hunger for answers had turned into a witch hunt. And this, perhaps, was the most terrifying aspect. Not the hotel, not the ghosts, not even the curse, but the way the case revealed something about us. The Internet was not merely an observer. It was a participant, feeding the myth, shaping the narrative, blurring truth and fiction, until even death itself became entertainment. The final moments. In the end, the official conclusion remained stark and clinical. Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old Canadian student, drowned accidentally in a rooftop water tank. Her bipolar disorder played a role, perhaps explaining her behavior in the elevator. No drugs, no alcohol, no foul play. That was the truth. But it was not the story. The story was the haunted elevator, the cursed hotel, the dark water parallels, the Elisa tuberculosis test, the guests who drank from the tainted water. And most of all, it was the sense that the Cecil Hotel was hungry, and that Elisa Lam was simply its most famous victim. The legacy. Today, the Cecil stands partly closed, partly renovated, always in limbo. Plans to transform it into affordable housing have been announced, but the building resists transformation. No matter what is painted over, no matter what is rebuilt, the legend remains. Elisa's case endures not because it is unsolved, but because it feels unfinished. It lives in the spaces between fact and fiction, in the silence of a security camera that showed too much and too little. Her death was not just a tragedy. It was an echo, and that echo still reverberates, whispering through hotel walls, through digital screens, through every retelling of her story. The Cecil Hotel waits, patient, its hunger unending. And perhaps, even now, as you read this, it watches. The weight of history. When we speak of haunted places, we often imagine castles, asylums, or abandoned graveyards, structures built on bones and memory. Yet the Cecil Hotel was not abandoned. It lived. It breathed. It consumed. From the moment it opened its doors in 1927, the building seemed to invite despair. The Great Depression hit, stripping the hotel of its luxury. Its marble lobby and ornate staircases, once symbols of grandeur, became a cruel mask. Behind the facade, the rooms grew cheaper, smaller, filled with those who had nowhere else to go. By the 1930s, suicides had become so common that newspapers nicknamed it the Suicide Hotel. Guests hurled themselves from upper floors, leaping into the city night, their bodies breaking against sidewalks and car roofs. For decades, Los Angeles police reports would contain the same line: location of incident, Cecil Hotel, 640 South Main Street. The building was becoming a receptacle for broken souls, a place where despair found its final resting place. Some believed the Cecil was cursed, others that it was simply a magnet for the desperate. But after nearly a century, the line between magnet and curse blurred. The dark pilgrims. Then came the killers. Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, checked into the Cecil during his spree in the mid-1980s. He was said to return bloodstained to the hotel, disposing of his clothes in the alleyway, barefoot and grinning as he ascended the stairwell. Austrian murderer Jack Unterweger followed years later, strangling women with their own bras while residing within the Cecil's walls. Two men, separated by an ocean, drawn to the same place. Why? Coincidence, perhaps. Or perhaps the building whispered to them, the way it had whispered to Elisa. The Cecil was not merely a hotel, it was a host, and killers, suicides, and tragedies were its guests of honor. The elevator as an icon. Of all the images connected to the hotel, none has lingered like the elevator footage. There is something almost ritualistic in the way Elisa presses the buttons, hides in the corner, steps out, gestures wildly. Some say she is playing hide and seek with something unseen. Others say she is trying to communicate, performing a code only she and her pursuer understood. To watch the video is to experience dread in its purest form, not because of what you see, but because of what you don't. The door does not close. The hallway beyond is empty. Yet Elisa recoils as if facing something monstrous. It is the most mundane of objects, an elevator, transformed into a stage for terror. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. The curse expands. The true horror of the Cecil lies not in its bricks, nor in its rooms, but in its contagion. Elisa's death spread across the globe like wildfire. People who had never heard of the Cecil suddenly knew it as a place of darkness. Theories spiraled outward: ritual sacrifices, government experiments, ghosts, demons. Each retelling fed the myth, giving it new life. And with each retelling, the building's shadow lengthened. Even after renovations, even after its rebranding as Stay on Main, the Cecil remained untouched in essence. No coat of paint could silence the whispers. No new logo could erase the stains on the floor. It had become immortal, not through architecture, but through story. The return of the water. In interviews, guests described the water that flowed during those days in February 2013. The shower was weak, one woman recalled. The water pressure was almost gone. Another said, the water was dark. It had a strange taste, a bitter smell. They were drinking from the same tank where Elisa floated. The building had not only consumed her, it had fed her back to its inhabitants. The curse was no longer confined to tragedy. It had become communion. The Cecil's dead were not only remembered, they were ingested. The last echoes of Elisa. It is tempting to end with Elisa Lam herself, a young woman whose life was tragically cut short. Her Tumblr posts remain online, frozen in time, a mosaic of thoughts, quotes, and confessions. Reading them feels like trespassing into the mind of someone still alive, as though she could log back in at any moment. Her last post, dated before her disappearance, was simple. A reflection, almost casual, almost ordinary. But now it reads like prophecy. She became unwillingly a myth, a symbol, a cautionary tale. And yet behind the myth was a person, vulnerable, curious, struggling, alive. That truth is the greatest ghost of all. The closing of the chronicle. Stand now in the lobby of the Cecil. The marble still shines, but the shine feels wrong, like light reflecting off a coffin lid. Look up at the staircases, the elevators, the ceiling fans that never stop spinning. Listen carefully. You will hear nothing, and then you will hear everything. A whisper, a laugh, The sound of footsteps on the roof. The Cecil does not care if you believe in ghosts. It does not care if you dismiss curses. It does not care if you call Elisa's death an accident. Because the building remains. And it waits. One day, someone else will check in. They will step into the elevator. They will press the buttons. The doors will refuse to close. And once again, the world will watch. The Cecil Hotel is not finished. It never was. And perhaps it never will be.